Residential Elevator. Excerpt. The Residential Elevator is a short, scary story about a boy who has an overpowering fear of the elevator in his apartment building. There was a young boy named Kenneth who lived with his parents. When his father got a new job in the city, the family moved into the top-floor apartment of an old residential building. Every evening, when Kenneth came home from school, he had to take a long elevator ride to the 25th floor. After a few days, he began to get a horrible feeling whenever he stepped into the elevator. He couldn't quite explain why, but for some reason, he had the distinct impression that he was being watched. He also thought he could hear strange whispers and mutterings as the elevator ascended to the top floor. One evening, when he arrived home from school, he saw some other boys who lived in the same building. They were a few years older than him, and he noticed that they avoided the elevator altogether. He caught up with them as they walked up the stairs. When he asked the boys why they weren't taking the elevator, they told him about some rumors that had been circulating among the kids who lived in the building. Apparently, all of the other children who lived there thought that the elevator was haunted. They said they heard disturbing shrieks and moans coming from the elevator shaft. They also told him about a kid who had gone missing in the residential building only a few months before he and his parents moved in. Kenneth had a sinking feeling in his stomach as he listened to the story the older boys told him. They said the kid had mysteriously disappeared, and nobody was able to find him. He was still listed as a missing person. The adults thought he must have been kidnapped, and the police were still investigating, but the kids suspected that it had something to do with the old elevator. That was why they avoided using it whenever possible. When Kenneth reached the top of the stairs, he ran into his apartment and breathlessly told his mother about the unsettling stories the older boys had shared with him. She just laughed and dismissed them as the typical rumors and legends that kids and teenagers always like to use to scare each other. His mother said that there was no such thing as a haunted elevator, and it was childish to believe such outlandish tales. Still, Kenneth couldn't help being terrified of the old elevator. He took to using the stairs as much as possible, even though it was a very long climb and it left him tired and out of breath. The only time he would use the elevator was when his mother or father were with him. He figured that nothing would happen to him as long as one of his parents was there to protect him. One evening, Kenneth came home late after football practice. He was deathly tired and was really dreading having to climb the stairs. He walked into the lobby of the residential building and breathed a sigh of relief when he saw his mother standing there, with her back to him, waiting for the elevator. The doors opened and she stepped inside. Kenneth jumped in after her. The elevator doors closed, and that's when he realized that the light wasn't working. They were in complete darkness. Kenneth broke out into a cold sweat. They started to go up. In the darkness, the frightened boy heard an eerie chuckling sound. "Mom, did you hear that?" he asked nervously. As the elevator ascended, the chuckling grew louder. It sounded like evil laughter. "That's the sound I told you about, Mom," he said, shaking with fear. A chill ran down his spine when he heard a deep voice reply, "You really believed I was your mother." Dark Sleep. Excerpt. Dark Sleep is a scary story about three girls who spend a weekend in a cabin in the woods and learn about a creepy urban legend. Samantha had two best friends named Jenny and Amber. Her father was taking her on a weekend vacation, and she invited them to come along. Her family owned a cabin in the woods, and on Friday evening, her father drove the girls up there. "See that lake?" asked Samantha when they arrived. "That's Lake Samantha. My dad grew up here. He loved it so much, he named me after it." That night, after they had unpacked their things, the three girls sat around and thought of ways to amuse themselves. "Does anyone have any spooky stories?" asked Amber. "I have one," said Jenny. "It's a true story, too. It happened to a friend of a friend of mine. She was babysitting these two little kids one night. She's sitting in the dark by herself watching TV, and the phone rings. She goes over and answers it and hears a voice on the other end breathing really heavy, and it says, "Have you checked on the children?" "Jenny, come on." Amber interrupted. "Everybody's heard that one. That's the lamest scary story ever. Does anyone else have a story? One that's actually true? I know one, Samantha said. About 10 minutes hike from here, there's an old broken-down house. We passed it on the way up here. It's out in the middle of nowhere, tucked away off a narrow little side road. A long time ago, a man lived there. His family were really wealthy, and they owned hundreds of acres of land around here. This man met a simple country girl from a simple country town, and they fell in love. His family wasn't too happy about it. They didn't think the girl was good enough for him, but he ignored them. He was an independent type of guy, and he went off and built a little house on a chunk of their land out in the middle of nowhere. He married this girl, and everything was wonderful. They had a daughter, and eventually they had a son. This is where the story starts to go bad. Their son was sick, not physically but mentally. He was sick in the head. He wasn't mentally disabled or anything. He was just a little off. By the time he was 9 years old, he became too much for his parents to handle. Throwing temper tantrums, erratic sleeping patterns, disappearing into the woods and hiding, that kind of thing, not knowing what to do about his son. The man turned to his family for help. His parents had the boy taken away. They sent him to a place deep in the woods. It wasn't an insane asylum, but it catered to people with special needs, if you know what I mean. His parents thought it was for the best. Over time, the family got used to not having him around. They gradually stopped visiting him. They functioned as if they had never even had a son, and everything went back to being wonderful again. 8 years later, the boy, who was about 16 or 17 at this time, managed to escape from the hospital. The staff did a search, but he was nowhere to be found. His family was notified, and they were devastated. They were worried for his safety. He had been alone in the wilderness for weeks, and he was probably dead. But the boy wasn't dead. One night, he found his way back home. He crept into his house, and one by one, he slaughtered his entire family. His father, his mother, his sister, all of them chopped to pieces. With the blood still dripping from his axe, he disappeared into the woods. When the grisly remains of his family were discovered a few days later, the townsfolk in the surrounding area were horrified. The police tried to find the boy, but it was no use. To this day, he has never been found. Since then, every year, around harvest time, people have started to go missing. And in their place, a corn-husk doll would be left behind. Legend has it, the boy still roams the woods around these parts. The surrounding towns have bought into the legend, and they hang dolls by their front door for protection. They say if the boy sees a doll hanging from the door of a house, he will pass that house by and leave the residents in peace. Nobody knows if it's true or not, but there's a doll hanging from the door of every house in town. "That's so creepy," cried Jenny. "Do you have a doll on your door?" "Of course," said Samantha. "My dad says he doesn't believe the legend, but we hung one just in case." "I think I just soiled my underwear," said Amber. Apparently, the house is still haunted by the ghosts of his murdered family, and if you go up there late at night, you can hear the whole thing take place all over again. "Do you think we could go up there?" Jenny asked. "Sure," said Samantha, "but tomorrow, during daylight." There's no sense in tempting fate. That night, the girls slept in the same room and huddled together, trying to pretend they weren't frightened by the story and expecting to hear something tapping at the window at any moment. The next morning, Samantha's father made them all a big breakfast, and they went down to the lake for a swim. Around noon, they decided to make the trip up to the old haunted house. When they got there, the girls sensed an eerie presence in the old, dilapidated place. It was enough to make their skin crawl. They explored the ruins of the old house, peeking into corners and sifting through the rubble. After a while, Samantha spotted something half buried in the dirt. It was some sort of book. She dug it out and dusted it off. The girls gathered around as she opened it and began to flip through the yellowed pages. "It's like a diary or something," said Samantha. "Maybe it's his diary," Jenny whispered. "Whose diary?" asked Amber. "The guy," said Jenny. "The guy that killed his family." Samantha read the diary aloud as the others listened. There's a dedication inscribed inside the cover, she said. It reads, "To my family who I love and cherish and who will always be with me. September 5th, 1987. It has been hard alone. All they had to do was talk to me. They could not talk to me. I hear their voices late at night sometimes. I hear their screams. It is cold and dark. I needed love. They did not love me. The medicines are gone. I am free, free from all of them. If they could not love me, they had to go. Dark sleep for everyone. I hear their voices still, always screaming. December 4th, 1987. They have stopped looking for me. It is okay for me now. I live in the forest. I chase down the animals and put them in dark sleep, just like Mom and Dad insist. I visit my old house at night. I listen to the voices. At least they talk to me now. October 3rd, 1995. I left the forest years ago and moved to a small town nearby. Nobody recognizes me. No one knows who I am. I hear people telling my stories sometimes. It makes me laugh inside. They all fear me. I still come to the forest sometimes. I spend the nights in my old house. Mom and Dad still talk to me. They say they are very proud of me. November 2nd, 1998. Life has been good. I found a job. I bought a house. I met a girl. She is very quiet and pretty. Sometimes I bring her to the forest. She likes it. I let Mom and Dad see her. They like her. July 1st, 2000. Today is a great day. I have a baby now. I am so happy. Mom and Dad are grandparents now. My wife isn't doing so well, though. It was hard for her. She might not make it. Maybe she will go in dark sleep. I am happy now. August 13th, 2010. I am so proud of my child. She is just like me, except she is much smarter. She has no problems. She doesn't hear the voices. She goes to school and has lots of friends. Not like me. Sometimes I take her to the woods. I love her so much. I named her after the lake, Samantha. For a few moments after Samantha stopped reading, there was a stunned silence. "What the heck?" cried Jenny. "Samantha, is this some sort of joke?" Amber asked nervously. "It isn't funny. This can't be true," Samantha whispered. "It couldn't possibly be." Just then, they heard the sound of twigs snapping behind them. When they turned around, they saw Samantha's father standing there. There was a strange, pained look on his face, and he was holding an axe in his hands. "You weren't supposed to find that," he muttered. "There's no other way now. Dark sleep for everyone." "No, Dad!" Samantha screamed. "No, no, no, no." When Samantha's father had finished chopping up the bodies, he put the pieces in large plastic bags and buried them deep in the woods, so deep that no one would ever find them. Now they could be together forever. "I'll watch over you now," he mumbled as he patted down the earth with his shovel. "You may not understand now, but you will in time. This is the only way for us to be together. Dark sleep forever. We all stay together." Gecko. Excerpt. Gecko is a scary story about a young man who buys a new pet and gets more than he bargained for. There was a young man in his 20s who moved into a new apartment in New York City. The night he moved in, he was lying awake in bed when he heard strange noises coming from his kitchen. When he turned on the lights, he was horrified to see hundreds of tiny cockroaches scurrying under the refrigerator and kitchen cupboards. He realized that his apartment was completely infested with cockroaches. The next day, he asked one of his coworkers for advice about his cockroach problem. The coworker said she had a similar problem and bought a pet gecko. She let the gecko loose at night, and it took care of all the cockroaches. That evening after work, the young man visited a pet store and bought a pet gecko. When he got home, he let the gecko go out of its cage. It immediately scurried into the kitchen and disappeared under the refrigerator. Then he heard a gecko sound followed by a loud snap as the gecko's tongue caught hold of a cockroach and pulled it back into its mouth. Days went by, and Howard saw fewer and fewer cockroaches. The gecko was doing its job well. Occasionally, he would hear the telltale snap of the gecko's tongue, and he knew it was catching the cockroaches and gobbling them up. One day after work, he was making dinner for himself when he saw the gecko chase one of the last cockroaches on the house under the refrigerator. He saw the cockroach scurry under, with the gecko far behind struggling to go under. That's when the young man realized that the gecko was getting bigger. He didn't see the gecko for days after that. Sometimes he would catch a glimpse of it out of the corner of his eye. Each time, it appeared to be bigger and bigger. One night, as he was lying in bed, he heard some strange noises in his room. Then he heard gecko and a loud snap. The next day, the young man was absent from work, but nobody thought anything of it. They just assumed he wasn't feeling well and decided to take a sick day. When he didn't show up the next day or the next, his co-workers became very concerned and called the police. When the police knocked on the young man's door, they got no answer. They broke down the door and entered the apartment. In the bedroom, they found no traces of the young man, but were horrified to see an enormous gecko sitting on the bed. Its belly was huge and stretched, and it just lay there lazily, regarding them with its big reptilian eyes. When they looked closer, they noticed something horrible. Sticking out of the corner of its mouth, there appeared to be a human foot. Man in the Elevator. Excerpt. The Man in the Elevator is a scary urban legend from Korea about a girl who lives on the 14th floor of her apartment building. It is also known as the elevator murder or the elevator killer. There was a 19-year-old Korean girl named Haruko who was attending university in a large city. One night, she had to stay late in the library to finish a project, and it was almost dark by the time she returned home. Haruko lived on the 14th floor of an old apartment building. She stood in the entrance and pressed a button to call the elevator. She always hated coming home alone so late in the evening. It just didn't feel safe. When the elevator came, she stepped inside and pushed the button for her floor. Just as the doors were about to close, a handsome man came running up. The man was out of breath and put out his hand to stop the doors closing. Then, he stepped into the elevator and stood beside her. "You live on the 14th floor?" he asked, seeing the button lit up. "Yes," replied Haruko. "Oh," said the man, smiling. "I live on the 13th. As the elevator ascended, he pressed the button for 13. Through the windows in the elevator door, Haruko watched the floors go by as they both stood in silence. She stole a few glances at the man. He certainly was handsome. She wondered if he would ever be interested in dating her. When he happened to look at her, she batted her eyelids and smiled sweetly at him. Just then, the elevator stopped at the 13th floor. The doors opened and the man stepped out. "See you later," he said. "Yes, see you," replied Haruko. As the doors of the elevator were closing behind him, the man suddenly turned around, pulled a sharp knife out of his jacket, and said, in a menacing voice, "Upstairs!" Then, laughing like a maniac, he ran towards the staircase. The girl was terrified, but before she could do a thing, the doors shut and the elevator began to ascend. She began to panic. Desperately, she hammered the buttons with her fist, trying to get the elevator to stop, but it was no use. When it reached the 14th floor and the doors opened, the man with the knife was already standing there, waiting for her. In Korea, people say that this is a true story. The girl was found dead, stabbed to death in the elevator. People say that the worst part was not her death itself, but rather the sheer horror she experienced in between those two floors when she was trapped in the elevator and knew she was going to die. They claim that this is the reason that all elevators now have a stop button. Flypaper. Excerpt. The Flypaper is a scary episode of Tales of the Unexpected about a girl on a bus who is accosted by a creepy old man. It's based on a short story by Elizabeth Taylor, the writer, not the actress. It's not very well known, but everyone who has seen it describes it as chilling, disturbing, and terrifying. In his introduction, Roald Dahl says it's so neat and nice and spooky that I only wish I had thought of it myself. When the story begins, the police are dragging the marshes looking for a missing schoolgirl. The hunt for 12-year-old Elaine Phillips continues. Elaine has been missing from her home for 5 days now, and police have issued another appeal today for any information that might help in the search for the Northwood schoolgirl. Elaine is slender and 5 feet tall. She was wearing a school uniform of gray skirt and maroon blazer when she was last seen by 2 of her classmates. The story centers around an 11-year-old girl named Sylvia. Ever since her parents died in a car crash, her life has taken a turn for the worse. She is quiet, sad and sullen, and can't stand living with her grandmother, who cares more about her roses than she does about Sylvia. One day, when she is on her way home from her piano lessons, Sylvia notices a strange man watching her. He gives her the creeps, and every time she looks over her shoulder, the man is there. Sylvia suspects he is following her, so she runs all the way home. When she gets back to the house, she tries to tell her grandmother about the man who was following her, but the old woman isn't interested. Never talk to strangers, her grandmother says. That's a basic rule for girls your age. But I wasn't talking to him, Sylvia protests. There's another news report on TV about the missing girl. The body of Elaine Phillips, age 12, has been found in the Northwoods marshes. Police and frogmen have been searching the area since Friday. Every Wednesday after school, Sylvia has to go to piano lessons. She feels trapped in her life. She doesn't have any friends in school. She hates school. She hates church. She hates piano lessons. She wishes she could be invisible or maybe just disappear. On the bus, a man sits down opposite her. Sylvia thinks she recognizes him. He's the man who was following her the day before. The man attempts to strike up a conversation with her. "I believe I've seen you before," he says, wending your way either to or from a music lesson. "I imagine." Sylvia puts her head down and tries to ignore him. "I used to do that when I was a child," the man says. "Make myself invisible and goodbye, nasty world." When the bus conductor comes to collect the fares, Sylvia pays for her ticket. The man buys a ticket for the same destination. Sylvia is disgusted when the man changes seats and sits down beside her. "I'm very fond of children, you know," he says. "I treat children on my own level." Another passenger, an old lady, sees that the man is bothering Sylvia and making her uncomfortable. The old lady shoots him a disapproving look and says, "I know your sort." Sylvia gets off the bus one stop early to avoid the old man. She runs to a phone box, intending to call the police, but the phone is out of order. All of a sudden, she hears the dreaded voice behind her. "Looking for some spare change?" She spins around. It's the creepy old man from the bus. "It's broken," Sylvia replies in a trembling voice. "Oh, what a pity," the man giggles. The embarrassment she suffered on the bus gives way to terror. "Go away or I'll scream," Sylvia warns. Just then, the old woman from the bus appears. Sylvia is relieved to see her. She hits the old man with her umbrella. "Be off with you," she shouts. "Leave that little girl alone." The old man reluctantly leaves, muttering to himself. "Didn't your mother ever warn you not to talk to strangers?" The old woman asks sternly. "She's dead," Sylvia replies. "Oh, I'm sorry," says the old lady. "Well, you can come with me. I think we ought to phone the police, don't you?" I think the police would be very interested in what happened on the bus today. They start walking, and when Sylvia glances back, she sees the man standing in the distance, glaring at them. The old woman brings Sylvia to her house and makes her a cup of tea. She tells the girl to put some biscuits out on the table while she phones the police. Sylvia hears the front door opening. The old woman turns around and smiles. "Hello, Herbert," she says. "You're just in time. The tea's ready." Sylvia is horrified as the dreadful truth finally dawns on her. The old man locks the door. There's a roll of flypaper hanging in the window, with a few flies stuck to it. Aha! Caught another one, he grins. It's the sweetness that attracts them, you see, and then the stickiness that prevents them getting away. As the old couple pull down the window blinds, Sylvia makes a desperate attempt to get away. The old man and woman grab her by the neck and shove her back into the chair. You haven't had your tea, they say with a smile.